lot of times where you never complain until you get on Yelp. And you don't want your clients doing that, obviously, and you don't want your team doing that.
Yeah. And I think the thing about that is that a lot of people will say that, good project management goes unnoticed, right? Like if you're doing a good job, you know it because there are no complaints and there's, nothing coming at you, which is fine, right? Like I'm okay with that. I get that. But at the same time, as individuals, if we want to be better at what we do, we have to have ways where we can figure out what we can do and how we can change what we do.
Yeah.
So asking for it. I mean, I always tell this story. The only time I ever had a client tell me that the project management was good on a project was when we were in person. It was a website that was supporting a live event and there was like a launch party afterwards. And somebody came up to me and said, "You really did a great job managing this thing. Thank you." And I was like, wow, like that made my year basically.
Yeah.
Like it just made me feel so much better because of all the hard work that I put into it. And I hadn't heard anything about the job I was doing prior to that. And I don't think any PM expects recognition for your job. It's not, it's a really hard job to recognize if you're doing really well. It's really easy to tell if you're doing it bad. So I don't know. It might be something to work into a routine, is like you said, checking in to see how you're doing with clients isn't a bad thing.
I like that you brought up, because I've heard that term before about project managers going unnoticed. That means everything's fine. But I do believe that having that recognition is helpful, not only for you to be able to reflect and look on what you're going to do in the next project, but also on where you want to go with your career overall. Because a lot of project managers I've seen over the years transition to different roles. And I think, again, that reputation maybe that you're building within that organization as a problem solver versus a person who can knock out a project, I think is super important. And you get that reputation not because everything's on time, on budget, but because people enjoy working with you and being a part of your team to solve those problems.
Absolutely.
What are some of your tips for somebody who maybe is not great at confrontation, but they have to walk in and deliver bad news either to the client, or they have to walk up to somebody's desk internally and ask them to do something they know that they don't want to do? What are some tips that you found have been helpful for you or for others in having those conversations?
It's two things. It's preparation and empathy. So I recognize that not every difficult conversation allows you the time to sit down and think about what a conversation would be and how it would play out. But having the time to analyze the situation, understand what's happening from your own point of view, gather facts, and just kind of know the situation before stepping into a conversation can be really helpful. Because I think for me, at least, it calms me down to know that I've thought it through a little bit. And then I like to approach a person or a group in a way that is comfortable. If it's a one-on-one kind of situation where I've got to talk to someone, let's say about performance or a problem with them, I won't schedule something out of the blue, but I'll ask them, "Hey, you want to go out for coffee or do you want to have lunch?" I like the idea of getting out of an office to have a conversation, especially if it's something that's really sensitive or personal. And then just sitting down and stating what the problem is and saying, from whatever point of view it is, like, there are problems with your performance. I need to talk to you about it. This is the thing that happened. And then just stopping and listening and watching and seeing how the person reacts. I think part of the preparation is knowing what the potential outcomes could be. Is this person going to start crying on me? Are they going to get upset or agitated? Are they going to laugh? Like, what's it going to be? And preparing yourself for what those possible outcomes or backlash even could be. And just listening and understanding and not being combative and not being argumentative, but having empathy to understand that, in that difficult conversation when it's one-on-one, that person has a story to tell, and there's a reason why they're behaving or acting the way that they are, and not knowing, understanding that you don't know what it is, but being willing and open to listen.
Yeah.
I would also say that with difficult conversations, it's really important to have a follow-up plan. So, after that meeting ends, you try to come out of that meeting with some kind of resolution or a plan to get to a resolution. But I've seen a lot of situations where people are caught in the middle of a difficult conversation and an argument, and then they never follow up on it to make sure that things really cleared up or like the plan followed through the way that it should.
Yeah, that's important.
Yeah, I think that's a really big part of it is letting that person know that I'm not having this conversation with you because I hate you. I'm having this conversation with you because there's a problem and I want to fix it with you. And then you can kind of make a plan and go from there.
One of the things I really liked in the book, you talked a bit about determining roles within meetings. I think meeting and meeting management is almost a profession unto itself. I mean, there's books upon books and Medium posts and things about how to run meetings and how to make them efficient for people. That's a super important skill set for a project manager to focus on, how to facilitate those things, not only just a meeting, but if you're doing a discovery workshop or if you're doing sprint planning or those types of things. You talk a bit about the different roles that I think are important, which I agree with, which is a leader, a facilitator, and a recorder. Could you give me a little bit more context and some tips that you've found that have been really helpful for running successful meetings?
So in terms of those roles, I think I even say this in the book, I recognize that not every team has enough people to staff a meeting for those roles, right? But for me, it's more or less understanding what are the types of things that must be done in this meeting to make it a successful meeting. And it's even, leading up to that meeting, thinking through, do we need a meeting for this? First of all, a lot of companies are over meeting. That's one of the things I find in my work is people complain about being in way too many meetings. And part of that falls on a PM. So thinking through whether or not a meeting is necessary or something could be accomplished through an email or Slack is the very first step. Then it's about identifying the goal for the meeting and making sure that you have the right people in the room for the meeting to meet that goal. So many times people get pulled into meetings and they have nothing to do with the meeting. And that's a problem with, over meeting culture. So and then, of course, it's setting up an agenda. I can't believe how many companies I've spoken to who just throw meetings on the calendar without any kind of an agenda or goal for the meeting. And that's like a simple thing that anyone can do and set up to make sure that they're going to get the most out of the meeting. Then when it comes to the meeting itself and those roles, I think it's good to have a lead, right? So like a main facilitator, and maybe that's the person in a smaller group who's responsible for the issue at hand and really wants to get the most out of the meeting. I also think it's important for every meeting to have a note taker, whether that be the PM or an assistant or an intern, somebody who's capturing the main points of a conversation and, of course, any action items or to-do items and sharing those notes with the team afterwards. I think there's a lot of stuff that I could go through, but I think those are kind of the key points about what makes or sets up and then makes a good meeting is just making sure that people are in the room for the right reason. When they're in the room, they're actually engaged. I actually instituted a no laptop rule in a previous job because people just were not paying attention. So again, it comes back to that idea of being a little fearless when it comes to that stuff to get what a project needs and get people to sort of align and be accountable to the project itself.
I love that. And you talk a little bit further on in the book about gatekeeping, which I think you're kind of referencing there when you talk about being that person that wants to have a meeting where it's very positive and you're getting forward momentum. But like you said, you also need to be that gatekeeper to know literally when to close the gate or close the laptop and say, we need to really focus here. I think understanding which position you need to be in for the different types of meetings is super important.
Absolutely.
In your opinion, Brett, what do you see coming after these frameworks or the next roles for project managers?
I think it definitely gets back to process. The future and even the current state for many people is using a hybrid of those methods and working out how can I be more efficient or how can we be more efficient as a team, and how can I draw resources or tactics from different methodologies to create a methodology that's going to work for everyone. So I like to think of it as sort of a flexible framework or a toolkit. If I've got a toolkit of deliverables and tactics for how to roll those deliverables out, I can pull out the tools that are going to fit into the scope of any project. So that might work out to be conducting a research process that is obviously going to happen in a more waterfall fashion. Working through a branding design that's going to be probably more waterfall because it requires more client or stakeholder input and feedback. But how do I marry development and design in a way that is efficient and gets clients buy-in and feedback accounted for in a way that is also efficient and doesn't draw out a timeline? So I think people are experimenting in a lot of different ways. I've got kind of a framework for how that could work in my head, and I plan to kind of get that written soon. But I do think that's kind of where we're heading, at least for agencies. And I would say for some internal teams too. I mean, Agile isn't necessarily the right fit for everyone, and neither is Waterfall. So there have to be some kind of in-between tactics that people can use. And there are tons of documented processes out there. So it's not like,
Sure,
me typing this out would make it any more special than anything else. But it's just this idea of flexibility and adaptability, which I think is important for PM.
Yeah.
I also think, on the sort of soft skills side that we've been talking about, I personally would love to see the project management role grow into a more strategic client-facing role. So being the person who understands a project's goals, understands the motivations of clients and business goals of clients and motivations that users have, and marrying that up into a process and a strategic brief for a project that makes sense. So it's not this one size fits all approach to projects all the time. And I think project managers are particularly well positioned to take that lead and act strategic and, facilitate conversations and discussions and decisions on a path that is more strategic and based on goals. So I really would love to see that kind of be more widely accepted as a part of the role.
I like to coach project managers around the strategy side of things, which is why are we doing what we're doing, and being a part of that understanding and being able to contribute to it. And I think this is a great natural segue. If you are a project manager and you're reviewing these different types of approaches, and you are maybe in a position like you're talking about, Brett, where you want to customize your process for the way that your company works or the way that your team works or the way that your clients expect work to be done, I think it's really important for a project manager to do things like go to the Digital Project Management Summit, build that network, join meetup groups, and read books on how other people are approaching these problems. I think there's a lot of information out there, but you can read everything, but you're not going to get as supercharged as a project manager until you start building up that other network of project managers. So things like the Digital Project Management Summit and meetup groups, I think, are extremely important for making you feel like you have that community, you have people you can bounce things off of. Would you agree with that approach?
Oh, definitely. I think there's something to be said about having a community to support you and being able to talk to people. So much of what project managers do is rooted in a very specific experience. I mean, yeah, we can talk about process in broad strokes, right? But when it comes to the challenges that you face and, like the imposter syndrome that you mentioned and difficult conversations, like those aren't things that you can follow a process on.
Right.
So talking to people about how they handle situations and just having that sort of one-on-one discussion can definitely help you feel a little bit more empowered to do the job that you're doing and do it better.
I want to move on to kind of the last bit of questions that I like to ask everybody. Obviously, being an author yourself, and you've written not only this book, but you've written hundreds and hundreds of blog posts about the subject. But if you had a book or another type of media recommendation, something that's been influential to you in your career?
So in terms of project management books, I think the first PM book that I ever read was Making Things Happen by Scott Birkin. And I think it's a great book. It's on my bookshelf. I'm looking at it right now. It's one that early in my career I referenced several times. Also, Managing Humans by Michael Lopp was an early one that I read that I really liked. When I think about currently what I'm doing and other books that I've read along the way, Rework by Jason Fried is a really interesting book. It's just an interesting take on how an organization can totally think in a different way and work in a different way and be successful with it. Game Storming is a book that I love. I don't know if you've heard of that one, but it's basically a book of exercises, which I have found really valuable when it comes to creating